Is it now? All right, here we go. 50, 40. All right, Tina, I'm letting people in. Might as well. Joe Frederick, Bonnie Talley, Carlos Garcia. Admit everybody but Zach so far. There's Zach. We just let him in. Line. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. No break up. Awesome. Good. Well, here we go. On the road again. Can't wait to get on the road again. So there's Zach. Where'd he go? I saw him for 2 seconds. He got a monkey on his back. Figuratively.
Hi, how is everybody?
Hey, Zach. What's going on, big brother?
I am good. Good to see everybody. I'm sorry I was on another call and I just had to squeeze out every last possible minute on that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. We are, let me do this, put you on the Jabra speakeasy. Can you hear me okay still, guys? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good stuff. All right, we'll give people just a second to get filed in here, Zach. We got a bigger group here than we had last time.
Great.
Yeah, so things are continuing to move forward, which is awesome. And we're going to go ahead and stream this. So we're going to put you live, buddy, so no curse words, all right? I know that's going to be rare. I'm going to figure that out. Let's do this. All right, post a long timeline. Nope, I want to put it up on my page. Sales Platoon, go live. All right, well, we'll see who else joins us. We've got, I believe, 15 in this cohort altogether. We've got a few people off today, so they're doing various things as they leave active duty. But guys, so again, I've been looking forward to having Zach back here for a while. So Zach will introduce himself in a little bit. I will also start introducing Zach. So I call Zach my international sales leader of mystery. So fascinating background. I will not steal his thunder on how he first got into sales. He's a veteran as well, although not a U.S. Armed Services veteran. He's a veteran. He was an ally. I'm not opposed to having, Axis powers on here ever, but, there's, he's an ally. But his story is really interesting. Couple reasons why I wanted to bring him on today. Zach, you've seen the evolution of Sales Platoon since we first started, and had, when I had short hair and only wore white. Now I'm looking more like the guy who's
that was the first thought I had when I came on. I was like, Raleigh, your hair has gotten a little longer there, man.
Yeah, I'm going for my civilian look so I can appeal to a greater audience, but we'll see. There's a group decision. So at any rate, so we've continued to grow and expand. We've put we have relationships now in place with Johnson & Johnson, Adobe, HubSpot, Esker, Nurses PRN, Guerrera Media, pretty close with other companies who are very interested, like Oracle, Uber Freight. So, we've been in discussions. And the idea, as you know, is that sales is an apprenticeship. You have to learn it by doing it. You can't watch videos. There's no such thing as asynchronous sales learning anymore, and there's asynchronous golf learning. You might be really good at putt-putt and chipping in your neighbor's backyard, but if you're on PGA Tour, you better know what you're doing. And so, you know what we do. We're 12 weeks. Just if somebody's listening in, I'm going to give our own shameless plug. So we are a 12-week to 6-month full-time apprenticeship for active duty military, making the transition off active duty. We do not charge the military veteran, never will. That is both for active duty and already out. We work with other companies who sponsor the education so that we can have full-time instructors who train and teach the art and science of sales. We've got corporate sponsors, again, from guys over at Connect and Sell who donate their, that's great.
That's a great company. Love that company.
Great, yeah. Chris Beal over there.
Yeah, Chris, yep.
And they're trainers. And then we've got, they're also learning, so we use Commercial Tribe, Paul Ironside, so we use that as well for tracking and learning. But there's a ton of companies that are, like these guys are learning LinkedIn Sales Navigator, HubSpot, HubSpot Professional Sales, CRM, prospecting Zoom Info we just signed an agreement with. So if they're listening, where they gave us a great deal, but we're hoping they're going to make that deal even better by sponsoring our veterans. I mean, come on, man, don't you guys care about our veterans? Give it to us. So, because again, it's expensive to train people.
Yeah,
But at any
yeah.
rate, so that's what we've been up to, man. We've had, pretty close to 100% placement from the people that have come. Our
Fantastic.
cohort sizes are 12 to 15 now. The only people who are not placed, generally speaking, they're looking for very specific jobs, so we're helping them make sure they go to the right place because they're retiring out, or
Yep,
they went back to school.
right.
So, one of the two. And so it's really been successful, and you've been a great part of that and an early supporter. But guys, I'll
Happy
give
to
you,
help any way I can.
yeah. So we got Zach here. So this is Zach Selch, International Man of Mystery. I will allow him to take the helm from here, but trust everything he says at least at 90%. So.
So thanks a lot for that kind introduction, Raleigh. So I, like Raleigh said, I was a vet, not U.S. Military. I was in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and I was a paratrooper scout in the IDF back in the 80s. And when I got out, I worked for a little bit of time training soldiers in Africa. And to show you how great I was at that, I was involved in training the Presidential Guard of Zaire. Now, as you might know, the president of Zaire is no longer with us, which shows how well that training went, apparently. But it was an interesting period of time for me. And I realized after a couple of years of doing that, that it probably wasn't the type of thing I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but it was really interesting. And somebody I was working with said to me, would you like to go into the commercial side of what we do? And that's sort of what I did. So for a couple of years, I sold military surplus, mostly stuff like field hospitals. And my timing was such that I got into Eastern Europe just as the wall went down. And what was happening was they were buying a lot of stuff there in the ex-Soviet satellite countries, and that was really good for me. So I did a lot of work in Africa and a lot of work in Eastern Europe. And I did that for a few years, primarily selling it's sort of funny. It was used military hospital equipment that had been US stuff, sold to Israel at one point, used probably for 5 to 10 years, and then was being sold on to a third country. And I leveraged that to get into selling medical equipment because now I had some experience, especially working with what you might call difficult markets. Brand new emerging markets in Eastern Europe, countries in Africa, etc. And so I did that for a while and I worked my way up. And typically what you find, my experience with selling is it's really hard to get that first job. And then you get the first job. And sometimes that first job is a pretty crappy job. And then you do well at it and you get your next job and then you get your next job, etc. And I worked my way up the ladder and I've been essentially a director or VP of international sales for close to 30 years at this point in my life, doing different things. And the other thing that I did, which I highly recommend if you have sort of the time or the runway for this, was I changed territories a few times. What we very often do is we get into a territory and we stick to it because we're comfortable and we can produce a lot of good revenue from it. But changing territories, you almost always take a step backwards in terms of revenue. On the other hand, if you can show somebody that you did really well in 3 territories, with all modesty, you can basically say your management material, because you can say, look, I took over a territory 3 times, different territories. I had to build them up. They were all very different. And I did that in multiple global markets, which was really, really helpful for me when it came time to go into, what I really wanted to be was to be a global VP. And by being able to say, yeah, I've sold in Africa, I've sold in Asia, I've sold in Latin America, I've sold in Eastern Europe, I've sold in Western Europe. It was a really, it helped me get into that global sales position. So that's sort of what I've been doing. I've mostly been in medical equipment, but I've done a couple of other things over the course of my career. And I've done a range of different products. And again, it's not uncommon. I'll tell you, it worked very well for me. I changed jobs about every 2 years during my 20s and early 30s. And then, I did a 4-year stint, and then I did a 12-year stint, and I did another 4-year stint. So it's sort of, as long as you can show, that once you hit about 35 or so, that you're taking a long-term job, it isn't that bad a thing to do 2-year stints, right? Because you get a lot of experience. Sometimes people look at it and say, well, you're jumping around jobs too much, but that said, you do have to get experience, and very often in the same place, they're not going to, if you're doing pretty well at something, people are always a little hesitant to move you into something where you're going to learn, a different skill, right? So very often what you have to do is you have to make that jump to learn new things in the beginning, right? You don't want to do that for 10 years or 15 years. 8 to 10 years is probably the upper limit of jumping jobs as far as I'm concerned. That's sort of the way I'd look at it. I typically will pull up, more of a presentation, but I just did a really good presentation last week for the US Commerce Department, which was 1 hour on best practices of global sales. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that to Raleigh so that he can send that to all of you, and you can watch that. And then we can, we don't have to waste an hour of doing a canned pitch, which I always do. You can watch that on your own time, but that'll give you a lot of really good ideas in terms of global sales. And I'm going to talk a little free form, and then I'm going to open up the door for questions, if that makes sense. So here's, I guess, the 3 things that are really important about global sales as far as I'm concerned. And everything else is sort of, icing on the cake, right? It's about sales. So you have to know how to sell. And I know that sounds sort of stupid, but very often people will say, well, my brother-in-law speaks Mandarin. I need a global sales manager, so I'm going to make him a sales manager, even though he's never sold anything, right? The first thing that you need to know to do global sales is you need to know how to sell. And typically, because there's a lot of cost involved with travel and communications and a lot of risk involved, you have to be able to sell pretty well, right? People don't want to take a risk on you. So you want to have some type of a track record. And most international sales for small to medium-sized American manufacturers are going to be through channels. So it's good for you to understand channel sales, how to sell through distribution partners. Okay. So that's also a good thing for you to know how to do and try and pick up, or at least understand. I have a book on that you can find on Amazon. There's another book called Making Channel Sales Work, which is a good book by Marcus Cauchi. That's another good channel sales book. If you're, a veteran and you're part of Raleigh's project and you reach out to me, I'll send you a Kindle copy of my book for free. Be happy to do that. And I think Marcus's book is available on Amazon Prime, on Amazon Select for free, but if not, it's $1 or $2. But those are good books to get a feel for channel sales. And then the third thing really is with international business is understanding and being flexible with international cultures. And what I find is service people typically have that. I mean, by show of hands, I'm guessing most of you have been based someplace outside of the United States, right? And you get a feel for dealing with not, Raleigh told me to use good language, so not upsetting the locals, right? You do want to get along with people. You want to learn how to be nice, and that's a big part of it, because a lot of people don't get how to deal with different cultures at all. So as a service person, you've picked that up, or at least you have a good basic understanding of that, right? So I think you do have a little bit of a starting point for that. And then the other thing that, again, like all sales jobs, even more so with international sales jobs, it's finding the first job. And one thing that I've found talking to a lot of service vets who have gotten into international sales is, here's the thing. Everybody wants to go be the regional sales manager based in Paris. Nobody wants to be the regional sales manager based in Lagos, right? And you guys probably have all gone through some uncomfortable situations. So if a job comes up and somebody says, hey, we really need somebody to go live in Nigeria for 2 years and nobody really wants to do it, and you're willing to do it, there's your foot in the door. And that's sort of a real key to this type of thing is, and I'm not 100% sure how it works in the US military, but I'm pretty sure that the young guy gets the worst jobs, right? When you go in, the guy who's going to be cleaning the latrines or whatever is probably the low guy on the totem pole, right? So it's the same type of thing here in sales. Is if you're willing to take that rough posting to begin with, 4 years, 6 years down the line, you might find yourself running that Paris office. And that's really the way to look at it is, if you get a way, if you are interested in international sales and somebody offers you a way into international sales, take it one way or another, even if it doesn't look like it's going to be the most fun job or the easiest job. The job that I learned the most on, I was hired to sell as an account manager, one of 6 or 7 account managers in Scandinavia for a company. And when I went in for my first day, my boss said, look, I have a problem. We just had an opening to be for the director of sales in India. Nobody wants that job because nobody's ever been successful at it. Would you take that job instead? And in a year, I'll give you, if you want it back, I'll give you the account manager job in Scandinavia. And I took the job, and I learned a huge amount, and I was very successful, and that really rocketed my career, right? But it would have been very easy for me to say, no way, that's just too hard a job to take, right? I took the job nobody else wanted. So that's something I highly recommend. One other thing, again, that I would suggest, because like one thing that I know, about military people, service people, is the military is all about learning, right? And what I find is salespeople very often cut corners on what they learn. And I would say in international sales, understanding things like international payments, understanding things like international shipping, documentation, that kind of thing, salespeople typically don't understand those. And taking the time to learn them, and those are usually things you can learn either online through courses or at community college, right? Because if you go into a company of say $100 million revenue, there are going to be a couple of clerks who probably aren't college graduates who do things like run the paperwork and run the shipping and so on. And they learned their skills from a community college. And if you as a salesman or a salesperson are willing to take a little bit of time and do those courses and learn those skills, you're going to know something that none of the other salespeople know. And you're going to be in a really good position to be in control of parts of the mechanics of trade that are really integral to international sales. And that's going to help you out for the rest of your career. I just read a book last weekend. This is a slightly different subject, and this really isn't specific to international sales at all, but it was called, I think, the high tech sales or something like that. I can get Raleigh the name of that book. It was written by a guy named Justin Michaels, and it's right now available on Amazon. But it's all about what we call the tech stack for selling, the tools that you use on your desktop for selling, and mostly on the top of the funnel side of selling. And by that I mean like finding new prospects, getting people into your funnel. And again, I was saying to Justin, because I actually know him personally, over the past year, I've done 4 questions on LinkedIn where I asked sales leaders, people who are tactical sales leaders. I've asked them to talk about their tech stack, what tools they're using to sell more. And lots of people I know basically aren't using any tools, any really good technical tools. So if you learn how to use this stuff, you're going to be better off and in a better position than a lot of other people, right? So that's something that you should take into consideration. That learning these type of things is always pays off, right? I'm 54. I've been selling for 30 years or so. I still read anywhere from 12 to 20 sales books a year, and I'm involved constantly. I take webinars and workshops, and I want to say I'm in 3 masterminds I pay, and I pay for a coach. So I do a lot of stuff like this to keep my my edge sharpened. That's going to be, I think, how I'm going to start things off. Then I'm going to open things up for questions. And if there aren't a lot of questions, then I'll blather on for a little while longer. Does that make sense, Raleigh? Cool. Does anybody have questions?
Awesome. So you had Joe here who's got his hand raised. So Joe, we'll let you go ahead and go into there. So.
Thanks, Raleigh. Hey, thank you, Zach, for joining us today. My name is Joe Frederick, transitioning commander of the United States Navy. The last 4 years I've spent working with international students in a graduate level program, so I understand the difference in cultures. For instance, if you're going to go to dinner with someone in Japan and they say 7 o'clock, you're knocking the door at 7 o'clock and you're leaving at 9. Vice, if you go to someone's house in Germany and they ask you to dinner, you show up 30 minutes late and you stay till 2 in the morning. How do you, if you're interested in international sales, what are some of the best ways to, if you don't have cultural experience, and those are very important, how would you recommend someone understand and learn those cultural differences? Because those, in my opinion, are the difference, could be the difference. You could sell all you want, but if you don't understand and appreciate or honor those cultural differences, you're not going to get the sale. How would you?
Oh yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks a lot. Just a sec. Pardon me. I am pulling up Amazon here in another screen, because I want to get a name of a book. So first of all, there is somebody called Aaron Meyer who wrote a book called The Culture Map. And that is a great book. Let me see if I can pull up. There's another one. Aaron Meyer is a great starting point. Now, here's the thing that you look at is there are about, depending on how you measure it, about 10 to 16 cultural parameters that are different in each culture. And there's sort of like a scale. Okay. So for instance, you look at hierarchy. How do people react to their hierarchy? And in some countries, when you basically say, can you make this decision? They're not going to be able to make this decision, but they might also not want to tell you that, right? There are some countries where it's very clear cut that only one person is going to make a decision. Then there are things like how cooperative the culture is, okay? And by that, I mean, like for instance, Japanese, when you talk to Japanese people, they're never going to make a decision by themselves. They're going to make a decision as a group, right? So what you're basically looking for now, if you understand the basic concept, what I typically do is when I'm going to a country, I'm going to look and I'm going to say, okay, just so I'm clear, I know that, give me a sec. So if I know that I'm, here on the scale, right? And I know that I'm dealing with a country that's here on a scale. I know what my delta is, right? And I know how I'm going to work for that. And I'm going to prep myself for that so that I'm always ready to say, okay, this is a country where the trust element is really high, where the hierarchy is really high, where the masculine level, the how much they're interested in power is low, those type of things, and I'll think this one through. Now, I think I mentioned I worked in India for 3 years. I lived and worked in India for 3 years a while back. At the time, my wife taught at university level. So I went into the university library and I got, I want to say 15 books on the religions and history of India. And I read those up very carefully. One thing, now this isn't the case in a lot of places. Like for instance, if somebody said, okay, study the American religion, it would be very hard for you to say, what's the religion, is the religion in Chicago the same as the religion in Texas, right? No. But if you say, well, if I want a basic understanding of Indian religions, now again, there are a lot of religions, but there's a core understanding. And if you understand the core religious understandings of India, virtually everybody in India is religious. They follow different religions. They understand each other's religions, and religion impacts their decision-making process. So if you understand the religions of India, you're going to do fantastic. And nobody ever, like, they are not used to Americans or Europeans, say, understanding their holidays. So if you're the guy who understands their holidays, they love you, right? If you go into Japan and you like something simple, right? If you know the correct way to eat Japanese food, it's a simple thing, right? But if you don't screw that up, they love you. I took some people, I took some Chinese, I took a group of distributors, including Chinese people, out for a Chinese meal in San Francisco a while back. And afterwards, one of the Chinese guys said to me, he goes, I've never met a white guy who knew how to order in a Chinese restaurant before. And that was what impressed him, right? And I didn't do it by accident. I worked really, really hard so that it looked like it was really simple, right? But I put this whole, like I ordered a really good, I ordered a meal that he would have ordered himself. And I did it in a honestly, a very staged way. I worked hours on preparing myself to give that order in the restaurant. But from his perspective, it was just like, wow, Zach knows my culture so well, right? And that's something the Chinese take very seriously because, from their perspective, they're always like, oh, Americans are ordering the wrong things. They're ordering, too much of the same thing and too little of this and stuff. So those type of things, you pick something that you can learn and you show it, it establishes rapport, right? And these type of things are really, really important. One thing that I say, and this, I'm sorry, I'm sort of piggybacking off of your question, Joe. One thing that I say in terms of building trust and rapport in general, not just international, the best way to do it is to ask a question that nobody's ever asked somebody before, okay? And typically, those questions about workflow are extremely powerful, right? Now, what do I mean by that is think about something that you know really well, right? And just to use like a military concept behind this, right? Like when you meet a civilian who doesn't know anything about military life, they ask you the stupidest questions, right? But then you meet somebody who asks you a question and you go, boy, he gets it, right? And, like if you're an infantryman and somebody talks to you about socks, you're like, boy, he gets it, right? He's not talking to me about, something stupid. He knows what my problem is, right? Now think about that from a sales perspective, and you go into somebody and you ask him a question that deals directly with the issue that his boss has never asked him. He's going to say, wow, that guy knows what he's talking about, or that person knows what they're talking about. Okay, now when you do that culturally, when you can say, oh, did you have, what did you have to break the fast, last night? Did you have a nice break fast meal with your family after Ramadan, right? No other, like, and I hate, I use this term a lot, like no other gringo's ever asked him that before, right? So he basically is like, wow, Zach understands my life. And that establishes rapport, right? Because, a year from now, somebody says, what do you think of Zach? He goes, boy, Zach knows Muslims better than any other guy I know, right? Zach knows Hindus better than any other guy I know. And when you're in that position, they want to do business with you, whatever you sell.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I appreciate that. And the reason I asked that is, with the German student, with my German friends in particular, in the Midwest, we're used to like a dinner party during the week, leaving
Right.
at about 10 o'clock, and we left, and we didn't realize, but that was an insult. That was to the German folk, to my German friends, was that we thought that their food was disgusting. That's what that meant, us leaving, and we had no idea. So it took about a month to kind of repair that relationship with them.
Right.
A lot of times, particularly in sales, you're gonna go out to dinner, and a lot of these deals will be made over dinner. Um, One last little anecdote: when I was living in Bahrain, the guys that did the maintenance on my flat we're all Muslim,
Right.
other smaller countries. So I went out and bought them dates during Ramadan to break their fast, and I never had anything wrong with my flat.
Oh yeah. Right. Well, and that's type of thing. Like so I'll tell you another story. Like when I was in India, I was working for this multinational. And I could tell 100 stories about like some stuff that was going on there, but I knew that my competition was watching me very carefully, right? Because I was at the time we were selling to a limited number of big corporations, and I was doing really well, and I knew that my competition was watching me really carefully. And one of the things I did to sort of mess with my competition was sometimes I would go in like to my hotel and I would give out cookies and sweets, because the tradition is that when you're successful at something, when you have good fortune, like you close a big order, right? You give out cookies to the people, like, the people in the hotel, the people, people who serve you, right? So sometimes I would just buy $10 worth of really nice cookies and I'd hand them out to people and I'd say, yeah, I had a great day. And I knew that somebody from my competition was going to be talking to the people in my hotel. They would hear about this and they would be, they'd waste 2 days trying to figure out where I just closed a purchase order, right? So, it was like I was basically trying to mess with them using a little bit of cultural indicators, because that's the way people did things. You give out cookies when you have a success at something. And so if I was giving out cookies, obviously I must have closed a deal. And if I closed a deal, they wanted to know where it was. So, I knew I could tie up some of their resources for $10, right? Any other questions?
That's great. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Anybody else have any questions at this point?
Some questions.
Hey, Zach, this is Tom Dresky. Again, Joe, thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences. So over the last, year and a half, obviously a lot of things have changed. So how have international business sales changed with this new landscape that we're in? And I mean, are there more opportunities to be remote, or are you going to be guaranteed, like, hey, you're flying to this country to work in this territory, or no, you can do this from, the comfort of your own home. You just got to change your sleep schedule.
That's a great question. So there are a couple of things that are, I think, really happened to change things in the past year and a half. And so first of all, companies, I think, are going to be more likely to be using regional sales managers who are local, because last year they couldn't put an American on a plane and send them over, and they had to find a solution. So they hired local people and it worked. So now they're going to stick with it. So on the one hand, I think it's going to impact beginning or entry-level expat sales jobs negatively. I think that's one thing. That said, I think there's a lot of work going on remotely. And when people talk to me about this, I believe that about 30% of the work that I'm going to do going forward that I used to travel for, I'm not going to travel for. Typically, I would say about 30% of my work was coaching and training. And I believe that all of that coaching and training is going to become remote, because the tools available have really become powerful. Now, in terms of international, you know, a lot of times people say, well, international, and they're thinking Australia, Germany, France, but there's a lot of countries out there. So Europe, Japan, Singapore, Australia, they're really, really comfortable with Zoom. They're doing everything on remote. That's great. It isn't the same for Eastern Europe, the ex-Soviet areas, you know, CIS. It isn't the same for Central Asia. It isn't the same for South Asia. It isn't the same for Africa. It isn't really the same for Latin America, right? And I worked really, really hard last year to stay afloat with sales. And it was basically, you know, a lot of scrambling, a lot of working, and some people were willing to do business on Zoom and some people weren't. And I had a lot of cases where people said, you know, they were like, yeah, I like the product. I want to think about this a little bit more. This makes sense, but I have to think about this. And I know that what they were thinking was they were not willing to, you know, they weren't willing to give me a purchase order without having met me and spent time with me, right? Which, as things opened up, we were able to solve that problem. And, you know, that's sort of, it's going to be a problem. I like a lot of this business you can't do without personal relationships. Not everywhere in the world, right? But you know, when you think about where the United States is really exporting to, about 75% of our exports go to countries which have a very, what's called a low index of situational trust. What do I mean? America is the poster child of situational trust. What do I mean? You go into Best Buy, somebody in a blue shirt asks you for your credit card and you give it to them. Right? You have no idea who that person is. They're wearing a blue shirt. Boom, I trust you enough to give you my credit card, right? In Nigeria, in Japan, you do not trust anybody until pretty much you've had a meal with them, right? You've talked to them, you've opened up. I have distributors and people I do business with around the world where I've met their children, like, I worked with somebody for years without ever meeting his wife or children. I have distributors that I've met, you know, all of their kids a couple of times, because that's just the way you do business in those countries, right? So that is going to be really difficult to replace. You know, it's going to be very difficult to replace that type of, you know, that type of face-to-face trust. And I think, you know, that's almost one of those openings that makes, you know, that makes opportunities for us, because, you know, if people say, well, I don't really want to travel because of COVID, and you say, yeah, you know what, I'm willing to get on a plane, that gives you an advantage over other people, right? So it's something to think about. I'm open to any other questions.
And we got Adam Potts here, so I'm going to go ahead and put him on the hot seat. And Adam, you are live, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks. Hey, Zach. Quick
So
question.
first of all, I got to say, I like your haircut too, Adam. I noticed that when I first came on.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm still trying to get away from the low fade. We'll see what happens over the next couple of years. So, quick question, Zach, and it kind of bounces off what Joe was asking about, but I'm just curious about like language barrier in international sales and how you work around that and building rapport if you don't speak the language, or if you're, I mean, I don't know how many people internationally speak English, or how do you work with that?
So that's a great question. And I'll tell you what, like, I know people who will tell you that language is the most important thing. I don't believe that, right? The people I do business with, pretty much all of them speak English with two exceptions. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But what happens is you're essentially doing business with your distributors and then going out to deal with senior people within the customer organizations. So typically the distributors speak English, and very often the senior people in the customer organization speak English. And again, when you take a look at where we're selling the most, right? And again, you know, of course you could say, well, Canada and Australia and England, America exports a lot to them, but also the Middle East, also a lot of large countries like India and Nigeria that are ex-British colonies, right? So everybody educated in England or Nigeria speak English, right? Everybody in the Middle East who's educated speaks English. A lot of people you're dealing with in the ex-Soviet Union, you know, CIS, the educated people speak English. Europe, the educated people all speak English. And so depending on what you're selling, virtually everybody you do business with speaks English. Okay, now what are the exceptions to that? I find that Japan, mainland China, and South America, because they are big enough markets, very often you're dealing with people who don't speak English. On the other hand, it's really easy and relatively cheap to get an interpreter, and the people you're doing business with are used to working with interpreters, right? So, you know, when I go to parts of Latin America, when I go to Japan, when I go to mainland China, I might take an interpreter with me to meetings. And as far as I'm concerned, they're like an extension of me, right? They're, you know, I don't want to depersonalize them, but they're essentially a tool, and they stand next to me and they translate what I say, and I just work. Here's the other part of that question in terms of building rapport. So I knew a guy when I was younger who he was an accountant with an MBA. So he had gone to school for 7 or 8 years, and every summer he took a 6 to 8 week course in a different language. Okay. And I met him when I was really young, when I was in my early 20s, and it really impacted me because he didn't speak anything fluently, but he could speak 8 languages at a basic level. So what I try to do, and this is Joe's exactly right, what you want to be able to do is not do business in another language. What you want to be able to do is speak to a waiter, to a taxi driver, to a hotel clerk in their language. So if you have 50 words in 5 or 6 languages, and you start off with the big languages, right? So if you speak 50 words of Spanish, if you speak 50 words of Arabic, if you speak 50 words of Mandarin, those are going to get you a long way, right? If you speak some German, if you speak, you know, a couple of other languages, right? Depending on where you're doing business. And then what you're basically doing is you're being able to talk to service people. Now, here's the thing in terms of building rapport. If you are out with a Japanese business person and you're talking English with that person, but you're at a restaurant, and then you turn to the waiter and you say 10 words in Japanese, the business person is going to say, hey, Adam really went out of his way to be nice and to accept my culture and to try and learn this. And that's where you get your brownie points. Um, but let me take it one step farther, right? So I don't know, do any of you guys, any of you ever read Kurt Vonnegut? So if you ever get a chance, read Kurt Vonnegut. He's of my, well, not my generation, but I was a kid, you know, he was a great author when I was a kid. He served in World War II, and he was a very, very funny, absurd author. And he wrote a book called Happy Birthday, Wanda Jude, which is very funny. And it's a totally, like, the plot isn't that important to my story, but it's an absurd, this absurd story about this guy who comes home from World War II, and he's very much a blowhard type of person. And at one point he's talking and he says how he goes, you know, I saw this German general and I snuck up on him and I strangled him. And as I was strangling him, I said to him in perfect German, I said, you know, democracy will always prevail over fascism. And this is what happens to evil people. And he goes through this whole speech. And then the ghost of the German general comes on. He goes, he was supposed to be speaking German. I thought he was an escaped Polish prisoner. I had no idea what he was saying. I had no idea why he was killing me. I thought he was robbing me, right? And I've always considered that funny, because you talk to people sometimes and they say, well, I'm fluent in 12 languages. And virtually nobody is, right? And you always have to understand that if you think you speak a language well, you probably don't speak it as well as you think you do. So you always want to be careful. I speak a couple of languages fluently. I never do business in anything but English, because one of these days there will be a dispute and somebody will say, but you quoted me a price, and you're going to say, but yeah, but that I quoted you a different price. And they're going to say, well, maybe that was a language mistake, right? So I do my business in English. But what I want to be able to do is to show people that I speak a little bit of their language, so I can get around, and that I'm showing that I'm trying to understand and accept and be part of their culture. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. That's good advice.
No problem. Any other questions I can answer? I'm gonna say something here. I belong to a couple of different sales organizations of, for want of a better word, I don't like this, this terminology, but like sales gurus, people who teach and write and do stuff about sales. And the one thing I'll say, literally, I had a discussion right before I got on this about how we're all trying to get more diversity into the sales force, right? So I love looking at this group of people, because I literally can tell you that we were just saying, I was on a call, right before this with 25 middle-aged white guys, and we were all saying, well, last week, 2 weeks ago, we said we were trying to pull some more diversity into our group. How come this is, we're not getting any luck at that, right? So I really am thrilled to see more and more diversity entering the sales workforce, because I think it's a great thing. So I hope, that you're all very successful, and I hope that you also spread out and work with the groups like the stuff that I do, like Rev Collective or Sales a Force for Good or anything like that, where we're really trying to get more diversity into the sales world. And by the way, if any of you want, you can ask Raleigh how to contact me. And I think I can probably get you some invites to some of those organizations that are trying to help younger people or newer people into the sales world get into these organizations, which are, networking organizations, and they have classes and discussions and stuff like that, that you might find helpful.
Awesome, Zach. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Guys, Zach is so he's got a book out. So just do a quick plug here for Zach. So he just published a book. He's going to give you guys a copy because he's a very generous man on Kindle. But he is got a wealth of information, and want to underscore a couple of points that you were bringing up. One is, we often say that, a lot of the times the difficulty when you leave active duty is you're navigating the streets of Paris with a map of Chicago. You had a world that you knew before, and that world doesn't exist. And so it's easy to get sidetracked in seeing patterns of things that don't actually exist, organizational structures, barriers, the rest. But the other side of that is you have a tremendous background that you're not aware of compared to your peers around what Zach was saying. I mean, for example, I remember being a young Marine, and they took us through a training right away when I went to Japan. That was like, do not take your ahashi, your chopsticks, or they don't call them chopsticks, they call them ahashi, and put them in the rice. Like, it seems like a good place to put it. Well, they use it in a festival for the dead, or passing from one to the other. And simple things like that, you already know. And the other piece is you've gotten a lot of training around tact and how to approach. I would say that when I've been a sales leader over the past 20 years and developed teams, whether it's as a rep, a manager, a director, a VP, what a CRO now, the challenge is a lot of the times they're coming out of college, they have no social skills in the business world in dealing with people. And this is a huge win for you. So, so a couple of things Zach was saying, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but Leah also is got her hand raised. We can go to her as well, but just wanted to underscore that. Please check out his book. He's an international sales guru. I love the story. Israeli Defense Force sold military surplus. It's almost like an episode of Blacklist. So thoughts on that, and then we'll ask Leah's question.
Oh, do you want me to talk first or Leah first?
Either way.
Leah, why don't you ask your question?
Hi, Zach. Thanks for being here today. Yes, my name is Leah. I am going to be retiring in September with 22 years in the Navy. So I am sitting here listening to you and just want to congratulate you because, gosh, you just sound so successful and that you've just done so much. And I'm ready to like update my passport and like run away with you to see the world and do international sales. But as I get excited, I like to think of myself as a realist and want to kind of pump the brakes. And I'm just kind of wondering if you can kind of share what's the other side. Like for anybody who wants to travel, they're like, ooh, yeah, that sounds great. But like when I say what's the other side, like what are the hurdles? Like what are some big obstacles in international sales?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. So first of all, it isn't that easy getting in, because here's the deal. Like, let's say somebody hires you to be, and I'll start at the very like beginning. Let's say somebody hires you to be an SDR for a company in the US. Their cost for your first 90 days is almost nothing. It's a few $1,000s, right? And if they hire you to be a regional sales manager for Europe, they're probably looking at, $250,000 investment in travel expenses before you get producing. So somebody has to really trust that you can do it. And that's the biggest hurdle, is that first jump into the job, right? So I'll tell you what, for instance, and the reason I sort of started my story where I did was I would not have gotten my first sales job if I wasn't a pretty good infantry sergeant, right? Because they didn't want me to sell. They wanted me to go out and train infantrymen someplace else. And then I leveraged that to get a sales job. Now, what I have, friends who have, for instance, I know people who they were in airplane mechanics in the military. And then they got from that into selling things like filters to airlines. And then they got from that to something else. And then 5 years later, they were selling something completely different. but it's getting that first job that's a hurdle, right? And what I'd say is try and leverage what you know. I don't know what you're doing in the Navy or what you did in the Navy, but if you could say, this is something that I did and I could sell to people who have a similar need, or people like this is what I know, and I can leverage it. That's something that, the trick is really to get that first job. Okay. That's the big hurdle. Now, the second part of that is like, what's the downside? This is a hard job, right? I enjoy it, right? But I'm 54. I spent the last year I did very little travel, but for 5 or 6 years before that, I was traveling 160 days a year, which meant I was doing 25 or so red eyes a year in economy class. Okay, that's brutal on your body. I sell a lot. The past 5 years, I've been selling a lot to governments, right? So I can tell you what the waiting room looks like for virtually every minister of health in Africa, because I've sat in his waiting room sometimes for 3 days. Get there in the morning, sit there all day, go home at night, come back the next day. That, and I go to places, I probably spent 100 days in the past couple of years in places that the State Department says you shouldn't travel to, because I had to travel there. So those are the type of things, when you say, well, what's the downside? Those are the downsides, right? That said, on the flip side, I've heard live music in Abuja, Nigeria, 12 times in the past 2 years, right? I've eaten some of the best damn street food in Africa and India, and like everywhere, right? I could tell you where to get some great tacos in Mexico City. I know where to get a really good egg sandwich in Kampala. And those are, like, to me, those are cool things, right? But there's the bad, the hard of the, when you say what's the hard part, well, this is a hard job. It's hard on your body, it's hard on your family, it's a hard job, right? But to me, it's worth it. I personally, I would rather not, I've said to people, if I hadn't gone through the military, I'd probably be like the regional sales manager for some small beer company, driving a truck around the Midwest, selling cases of beer to bars, right? And I wouldn't want to be doing, personally, I wouldn't want to be doing that. That's a good living for people, but I'd find it a little boring doing the same thing day after day. So that's the pros and the cons of it.
And for the most part, it doesn't really sound too far off from the military, really.
Oh, and I was going to say to what Raleigh said was, I'll tell you what, like, so I live in a nice suburb of Chicago. And a couple of years ago, one of my kids said to me, not that nice. I'm not, I'm comfortable. I'm not, not wealthy. I'm comfortable. But I live in this suburb, and a lot of my neighbors are very well educated. And a few years ago, one of my kids said to me, Dad, considering your level of education, we live pretty well. Our neighbors are all better educated than you. How come we can afford to live here? Right? Literally, that's what my kid said to me. And I was like, so I said, well, I'll tell you what. I go, I'm the toughest guy in town. I go, I got here because I'm tough, not because I'm well educated. And I said to my kid, I said, so you have two choices. You go and be a paratrooper and then go and get a job, or you go to school. What do you prefer? Do you want to be tough, or do you want to be well educated? So my kid was like, I think I'll go to school. But the thing is, you go into this, and like I was saying to somebody a while back, somebody at work, I was arguing with somebody, And I was like, you have no idea. Like, just give up now. You have never met anybody as tough as I am. Just give it up, right? You think you're going to bully me around? It isn't going to work. Now, I'm not saying this, to brag, obviously. What I'm saying is you guys are tougher than 95% of the people you're going to meet in the workforce, right? And when you get out and somebody says, "Oh my God, I had such a horrible day yesterday. I had to work until 5:15 and I got home and my beer was warm," right? You're going to be like, "Okay, suck it up, puppy." Right? Because you guys know what it's like to live a tough life. And when somebody says, "I need somebody to drive to Memphis tomorrow for an important meeting," and everybody else is saying, "Oh, I don't want to drive 3 hours," and you're going to be the one who says, "Driving 3 hours for an important meeting, that doesn't matter. I can do that." Right? And that's where you're going to bring in a lot of value in the beginning because you're tougher than everybody else. Right? And I think that's, whatever else you have that, right?
Yeah. I mean, the really good point, Zach. And, guys, it's, we're at the top of the half past, I don't know, top of the hour. That was kind of an awkward phrasing, so I need to work on my English skills. But no, it was a really good meeting with Zach. As always happens, we go so fast in these. So I'm going to do what we always do. So bottom of the hour, I think it's called. Thank you, Dusty, who's never slow to respond. Good stuff. They're going through murder boards right now, by the way, is what I call them. So they're doing their group presentations and doing their outreach, and where they connect and sell,
Right.
they're getting a lot of experience. And you're right, that resiliency, determination, grit it's kind of one of the words that's getting out there more now, grit.
Right. But
We
I'll tell
got
you
that.
what, nobody gets grit. People are like, "Oh, I have grit." In senior year of college, we only had cold water in our showers. Like, people don't get what grit means. And that's the thing, you guys are going to hit the market. You're just going to be a lot more resilient than anybody else.
Yep. Yep, I don't know what happened there, so that might have been Zach. Probably for his next call because he's the international man of mystery. So let's do this as Zach can get to his next call. I'm going to take our photo that we usually take. So I need to find my handy camera. All right, so we got that. So if you guys want to come off of, I'm going to fix this flop here. I look like a fraternity kid now instead of a Marine, but that's all right. I earned the right. All right, and we're going to come off camera and take a nice, beautiful photo. So everybody that wants to do that, wow, Michelle, hey, looking sunny and happy. That's one of the benefits of a career in sales. You can work from anywhere. So, all right, we're going to count down from 3, 2, 1. Great photo, everyone. All right. And as you guys know, this has been live streamed on Facebook, so please repost it to LinkedIn.